questions. So one person says, if all there is now, what convinces me to go to work or to do anything? Hmm. What convinces us to do anything is really survival and programming. So in presence, one could experience strong programs of deficiency, woundedness, lack, which then propels them to take action from that. That's how I think most humans live in the ego consciousnesses. So when we say in presence, the question is that ego consciousness strong in presence? Because that's what's motivating you to do almost everything. Survival and very deep programs like deficiency, woundedness. It's rare to meet someone who lives their life from the calling of their heart, from their bliss, like really, really living your life according to how you want to live it, what really calls you. Because we're so programmed to feel obligated to do certain things, like the programming of being human. Again, running on separation and deficiency, that's what propels us. That's what motivates us. So we wouldn't have any point of reference for what it would be like to live without that until we live without that. Just think about it that way. We have no point of reference, none, on what it's like to live in the flow like that, to live from presence. So what I find is that in living in presence and then undoing the programs of deficiency and trauma, life flows rather easily and nicely. There's the good news, is that when you get those programs out of the way, living still happens. But where does the motivation come from? That's the tricky question that people have. But I have to tell you, first of all, that you would not have a point of reference for that. If you've always been motivated by deficiency and lack and separation, of course your mind is going to say that. It's going to say, what would motivate me? Because you've been motivated by those things all your life. This requires somewhat of a leap of faith. Or, how do I say this? Because you have no point of reference, you're diving into the experience of living in presence without a map, without anything there that tells you how to live. When we're living to according to our programs, they're almost like rules. Like we have to survive by doing this, by doing that, by doing this. They're like rules that govern our lives. So we didn't even get the chance to kind of ask, what do we really want when we're governed by rules? That question, what do I really want, gets buried under all the rules and all the programs and the conditioning. So that many people don't even get to experience that question, to live out that question of what they really, really want, until they remove all of the programs that have been motivating them previously. Because otherwise, you're still going to be motivated by that. So to take awakening very radically would be to take that leap of faith and deconstruct these programs and then live from there and see how life moves you. And I know that's probably no answer to the mind that's afraid. So the mind that's afraid will come up with all sorts of scenarios like, if I lose my deficiency story, then I won't be able to make money. If I don't have a deficiency story, how will I connect with other people? If I don't have these stories, how will I know what to do in life? But that's coming from the programming. See, those are questions the programming would ask, wouldn't it? Because that's the only thing that it knows. It only knows motivation from deficiency, lack, separation, woundedness, trauma. When I watch people waking up in the process and they come to me and they do a session, there's a period that people or a phase that people get in where it's like they have one foot in the world of ego consciousness with all the old motivations, and then one foot, so to speak, in presence where the old compass isn't there. So there's no story or program really, making anything urgent or compulsive. So they might just be a lot of being. Without that driving force behind everything. But quite frankly, the people that present issues from that stage, that phase, what they're really dealing with is old leftover ego consciousness almost always. The mind that says, what will I do next? Or how will I go to work? Is still coming from that same consciousness that needs motivation, needs survival in order to know how to live. So wonderfully, the work to do is a process again of removal. It's not of cultivating a new state or even a new understanding around things, although you may have that. You may have a new understanding around things. But it's really the removal of the programming that asks those kinds of questions. The dissolving of that ego that asks, what's the point? What do I do now? The people that I've met that are in the flow, that are living out their calling, they are following their heart, they're doing what they want to do on earth, not what they think they're supposed to do, or not what their parents thought they were supposed to do, or others, but what they really want. Those people, as far as I can see, they've questioned all of those old thoughts. They've stepped out of that old ego consciousness that has those questions. It's not like they answered those questions. The question, what do I do next, can't be answered really, because next hasn't happened yet. Truly, you can have a thought about what's supposed to happen, but at this stage of the game and the awakening process, you know that many of your thoughts don't come true, most of them. So the plans can happen. But the folks that I know that are living in that flow, they are in that flow. So they don't have those questions of what to do next as an existential question. It's irrelevant in the consciousness that doesn't identify with the programs. It's irrelevant. And flow happens naturally. And when you're living in presence, it's like you can have goals and objectives, but if you don't meet them, there's no attachment to those outcomes, so it doesn't affect your identity. So you're not searching for things in order to find a complete sense of self anymore, because you know that you're already whole as you are. So there's nothing in that sense that will make you more whole. So the work and the living and the doing don't come from deficiency stories and lack and woundedness anymore. They would then have to come from what is one's true inspiration, true enthusiasm. Where is that? What is the thing that you end up doing in life that you do it because it's a natural expression of what you are, not because you feel obligated, not because you're just trying to survive. It's a process of removal. So basically, what that means is the deficiency story has self-sabotaging elements in it. So as long as you believe in a deficiency story, again, the story wants to confirm itself. It wants to keep the identity in place. So it's a removing that story is what it is. It's not inserting a new story there after that. It's just leaving you in presence without that story. And from there, because you're not being driven by deficiency, that's not going to take you here and there and the other. So you're not going to be driven in that way anymore. So it's kind of like, now what, right? But you can't answer that with the mind because the mind can't know what's going to happen ultimately. Can't know. So you can't lead with the mind. There's a certain amount of just relying on presence and living from there and removing whatever blocks are still there that make you live your life according to obligation, staying safe, feeling secure, protecting yourself, like where you start to drop many of those utilities that are there to protect the psychological sense of self anyway. So as those fall away, at this point, then when all these things fall away, there's nothing to say to those people. You don't have to give those people guidance. This is what I'm saying. Is those who remove the blocks, remove the sabotage, see through the deficiency story, do not need guidance on how to live in the flow because they remove the blocks to that flow. They don't need a teacher. They don't need anyone to tell them how to live because in removing the blocks, showing up and living authentically according to what you really want starts to show up. So almost all the work that I'm doing with people around their life, their career, the unfolding of their life, all of it is about removal of blocks. None of it is about trying to cultivate a new state or a new consciousness. None of it is. And when people remove the blocks, they don't come back to me because my job is just to help them remove the blocks to that flow. That's all. So as the blocks are removed, there's nothing that I could show them or inquire with them on that's going to help them at that point. Those people are just simply living out their inspiration, their enthusiasm. This kind of inquiry can be really deep and rich when you really start questioning the motivations that you have in life, what drives you. Because what you'll find along the way probably is repression. How does that play into it? If you've spent a good deal of your life repressing certain thoughts and emotions, you can't even really show up authentically in your life because you're living for other people. You're living for conformity. You're making sure that you're keeping things at bay, holding back. And that repression is running your life to a certain degree, right? Keeping you afraid of certain situations, afraid to really open up to people, repressing love and affection, repressing joy, repressing anger. It's hard to live an authentic life when repressions are happening. It's hard to even know what you want when you're living according to rules about the expressing of emotion and things that you didn't even really agree to consciously. It just happened for you. So living a life that's authentic and enthused and inspired would be about removing these repressions too. Repressions change the way you live your life. When you're repressing something, it'll stop you from going into certain situations and relationships. It'll keep you afraid to be around certain people. It'll keep you afraid to speak up, even about what you want. It's difficult to be vulnerable when you're repressing. So all that plays into it. There's something about living in the moment as presence where you are not repressing anything and not avoiding anything so that everything can come online. Nothing is being bypassed that you can tell. That becomes that becomes the natural flow in life when all that work is being done. There's nothing else that you have to do for those people. That's what I'm saying. It's a process of removal. Deprogramming. The desire for safety. The desire for safety. Even though safety is important, when we overemphasize it, we play it safe in relationship, in the world, at work. We're too afraid. We're too afraid to truly realize our potential here, is what I'm saying. The feeling of needing safety is really important when you have trauma, but you have to go through it. You have to deconstruct it in the end, because if you keep coming back to safety, to what's comfortable, how can you live that life of freedom? How can you truly be free if safety is your most important thing? Rumi said, throw out your desire to be comfortable, your desire for safety, or something like that, in favor of freedom. And that's what he's talking about. When we play it safe, we don't allow ourselves to feel certain things, to have certain experiences, to be triggered. We protect ourselves from these things. Therefore, aspects of our ego consciousness don't get seen. They're protected. They're coddled. And so that conditioning continues and makes a life in the flow very difficult. Let me see what else I have here. So someone wrote and said, I have a friend who betrayed me, slept with my girlfriend. I can't forgive. I won't forgive either one of them. Yet it's eating me alive. How do I know when I have forgiven them? When they don't take up any space in your consciousness anymore, there's forgiveness. If you're still ruminating on needing to forgive or believing that you have forgiven them, chances are you haven't really reached that depth of forgiveness where you truly let go of something. You may not forget it, but you've let go of the emotional charge around it. You've felt everything that needed to be felt. So for me, forgiveness would be something different than the way that people talk about it in our culture. Forgiveness is happening anytime when from awareness things are allowed to be exactly as they are. Feelings, sensations, thoughts about someone, just seen and allowed, just watched and doing nothing with it, felt, doing nothing with the feeling. Every time you allow these thoughts and feelings, you are already forgiving the people or the situations connected with them. But often we try to come to forgiveness from the belief in separation, or we do it externally. It's like we think about situations and people and we try to forgive through that same thinking. But if the body is holding or keeping the score on the pain, then thinking that we forgive or trying to get ourselves to forgive someone won't align with the body. The body keeps the score. So if there's grief, heartache, resentment, pain, anger, rage, and any of those can be repressed, then there can't be forgiveness, because the body, even if the mind wants to talk about forgiveness or act like it's forgiving, the body tells the truth. So for me, it's a matter of feeling into the body and finding out what is it believing about this situation. So if I've got a friend in my life who I feel like has betrayed me, I'm going to feel pain around that. Let's say in the heart or the stomach, going down and feeling into that and skillfully mining out the phrases there around this issue. So, for example, I would look at the person in awareness and I would say, I forgive them totally. And then here comes the objections. No, no. But there you're making the non-forgiveness conscious. You're seeing it all. It's all getting bathed in awareness. Each thought about the person, each feeling met directly through inquiry, bringing it up and then meeting it. If you meet every feeling around it, all the anger, the fear, the shame, the hurt, welcoming it all, there's nothing else that has to be done. The forgiveness has happened. Non-forgiveness is identification with thought, feeling, and sensation. When you identify with thought, feeling, and sensation, it's difficult to forgive because you're getting something out of the identity, out of the non-forgiveness. You get to continue being a deficiency story or someone who's been wounded or hurt or victimized. So you identify with that, betrayed, identifying with that, and then trying to find forgiveness through the same mind that identifies with it. It's not going to work deeply. But when you start doing somatic work, where you start feeling everything, not hiding feelings from yourself anymore about a situation. If you're angry, be angry, but consciously angry. If you say to yourself, I'm not angry about such and such betraying me, yes, I am. Now you're acknowledging something that's there, bringing it into awareness. I'm mad because he betrayed me. Let that be. Forgiveness of that thought is forgiveness of the person. Seeing of the thought is forgiveness of that person. Going down to the feeling the anger or the hurt there directly, that's the forgiveness of the person. The situation is the forgiveness of the direct experience of that feeling. See, if you try to forgive people while you still have these feelings about the situations, it's your mind's trying to override the feeling. It's trying to come up with a new set of thoughts about something that will somehow make your pain go away. But the way that what we know about trauma in the body is that the pain doesn't go away. So when we don't meet something, we don't feel it, we don't see it, some betrayal or something, science tells us that festers in the body, that pain can even turn into chronic pain and illness if left undealt with. So forgiveness to me is a way of life. It's a way of living. It's not something that I do every now and then. It's the way of being with relationship or with phenomena. So if I'm thinking about something and ruminating on somebody or something that did me wrong, that's non-forgiveness. That's just ruminating. That's reinforcing the pain of it. But if I begin witnessing all my thoughts around that, instantly forgiveness is happening regularly. But here's another thing. How do you forgive parents or people from the past when you've got repressed anger or repressed fear or repressed guilt or shame around something? How do you meet those feelings if they're repressed? You can't. So there can't be real forgiveness when there's repression or avoidance or resistance to feel something. When you finally meet the hurt directly around something, when you meet it and it's not repressed, when you finally meet the anger and it's not tucked away, it's right there, you feel it, you see the thoughts. That's forgiveness. Repression, by its very nature, is not forgiveness. And we can't blame ourselves for that because we repress unconsciously and involuntarily. But nonetheless, repression still happens. So what I'm seeing with people in session is they're going back to childhood and discovering that they have feelings and thoughts about what happened to them that they had no clue. For example, in some cases, as extreme as buried rage. In other cases, unresolved grief or shame. And so they're surprised to even find out that they truly feel that way about something or someone. They're surprised because it's repressed. they literally weren't aware of the feelings that they had about something. That's what repression is. So watching them in session is amazing gift that I get to receive all the time, where people unearth these old feelings of anger or shame or guilt, grief, and for the first time they're just meeting that directly, meeting all the thoughts with it, and then watching them after that see the whole situation differently, looking at Father totally differently without all that pain that was buried down into a contraction or something. So everything is seen differently after work like that. Sort of immediate compassion comes up all the time with people. It's like finally I can see that my mother's pain was her pain and that it really wasn't about me. But I couldn't see that as long as I was repressing this or that or still believing this or that about mom or about myself with mom. That gets cleared away, and suddenly now you can see something totally differently. And there's forgiveness in that, compassion, love. Sometimes we do have to get angry first. So there's a whole host of us that repress anger, and this is a big deal because let me just try to keep it to personal experience. When I was bullied in sixth grade, I couldn't get angry at the bullies because it didn't feel safe. And all that anger had to get tucked away somewhere, and I became a peacemaker, someone who only shows nonviolence and non anger as a way to survive. So, how was I supposed to really forgive my bullies and move on if I couldn't feel something that was really connected to it? Fear was somewhat repressed around the bullying too. It didn't feel safe to show fear at that time. So through the years I did all this work around forgiveness of the bullies, but didn't have access to these emotions. So the forgiveness didn't go as deeply as it could have. I had to be pissed. I had to be able to be fucking angry first and fully acknowledge that. Scream and yell and feel it and feel outraged and want to attack them and want to do violence to them. I needed to go there in my own consciousness. Strangely, I had to kill them. I had to beat them up in my own consciousness so that I could feel the empowerment of that, no longer feeling impotent in those memories where I submitted to their power and felt very small. It was difficult, if not impossible, to truly forgive from a place of disempowerment. I don't know how else to say that. But when you're living in disempowerment, if you haven't met those feelings, including any rage that's repressed, the forgiveness may not go very deeply. Because once I was able to really get angry and access that anger, it's like forgiveness was just there naturally. I didn't have to do anything else. I just had to feel what it did not feel safe to feel back then. That needed to be felt. So now when I look back at my bullies, let me be honest here. There's a softness there. Clear seeing that they were in pain, especially one of them, the ringleader, in a lot of pain. Strong deficiency story, and I can see that now. Whereas before, with the anger repressed, it wasn't clear. It still wasn't clear. You can't let go of something that you have an emotional investment in. I mean, it's true of even addictions, like people trying to overcome addictions while they still have an emotional investment in it. like emotional drivers are still driving it. And they're trying to put down the addiction, and it's challenging. It's the same way of trying to forgive someone before you've dealt with the emotional drivers behind the non forgiveness, behind the pain. So, who would have guessed that sometimes we have to acknowledge our anger and rage fully before we can forgive somebody? I think many of us thought we could skip that step, right? I did. True story. I thought that I could just go around the anger, like, and then get to peace and non-forgiveness, true peace and non-forgiveness if I can go around it. It doesn't work. When you're doing inquiry and you find really painful or rageful thoughts about yourself, part of forgiveness of yourself, how do you forgive a self that isn't really there, first of all? How do you do that? Well, you do that by not treating it like a self that's really there. That's how you do that. If you treat it like there's a real self inherently here, and then you try to forgive from that self is really just a bunch of programs. And that set of programs can't truly forgive because of its investment in the emotions under that program. So, forgiveness of self is not, in my view, saying to yourself, I forgive myself. I'm sorry to myself. It's not self talk. Because in self talk, you're treating it like it really is an entity there. And that's not very skillful. But if you just notice yourself, just as others, every object arises as words, pictures, feelings, and sensations. So objects about someone that you can't forgive or people, those appear as words, pictures, feelings, and sensations. So as you welcome all the words, feelings, sensations around someone, another, that's forgiveness. Same is true of the self. If I believe that I hate myself, for example, if that's there, then how do I forgive that self? How do I forgive? I don't, because I'm already treating it as real. But what if I simply allow the thoughts of hating myself? Fully allow them. I hate myself. I want to die. Witnessing all of those and then feeling everything that's with every one of those feelings, like being with everything, meeting everything that you hate about yourself, making all that conscious. And then there's a forgiveness of self naturally in that. There's a forgiveness of all experience. And part of your experience is the stories about yourself. So those are allowed to come and go freely. You couldn't go wrong with self forgiveness. You couldn't go wrong with forgiveness if you looked at it this way. That really we're not forgiving people ultimately, or situations, or self. We're allowing words, pictures, feelings, and sensations to be as they are, to be felt and met and allowed to dissolve. You really can't go wrong with that. It's a much deeper forgiveness in my experience than trying to tell yourself through thinking that you forgive somebody. The body doesn't agree. If the body doesn't agree, it doesn't work. Okay, let's see here. Here's another one. I lost my mother to COVID last year. They go on and on about that. I'm sure very painful. She was my best friend. Every day there's a big missing hole in my heart and my life. How do I deal with this through inquiry? Well, it's a lot like forgiveness. Like, how do you forgive? How do you let go of? How do you allow the death of someone close to you? You have to feel it all. To feel all of it, the grief. And when I say feel it, I mean like meet it directly. So I don't mean just sitting here and thinking grief stricken thoughts and feeling grief feelings and identifying with them. But in fact, when you bring the feelings up and the thoughts to be with them, to allow them all fully from awareness, including the deepest pain around it and all the programs that come with it, the thoughts like a big missing hole in my life, that thought allowed to be. I miss her deeply, that thought allowed to be in that feeling. I feel guilty. It was my fault, allowing that thought to be as it is in awareness and that feeling that goes with it. And when you feel a big wave of grief in the body, honor that. Let your mind go quiet and just feel it. Bring presence directly to it and stay with that grief feeling, that feeling of loss. Stay with that. Don't turn away from it. Stay with it. Let it fall away from you. Let it just fall away naturally back into presence. Don't push it away and don't turn away from it. Every time you have waves of guilt, grief, this is incredibly helpful. As I've shared before, when my mother died, you know, you look at me, I'm in the funeral home crying much more than anyone else because the waves of guilt or grief that were coming up were being met and I wasn't trying to be strong. So I could tell that people in the funeral at the funeral service were trying to be strong, biting their bottom lip, trying not to emote, trying to keep it together. And one of my aunts was sitting behind me, and I'm just crying profusely, meeting the waves of grief. And I'm in the process of that and loving that, as painful as it was, because I knew that I was meeting this so directly that there would be a healing, that I knew that I wasn't going to be fucked up over this. So I just allowed that to happen. My aunt behind me, she said, I can tell you're not taking this very well. Really? I think I'm taking it perfectly, actually. It just looks like you're not taking it very well. It wasn't even a trigger, it was just fascinating how we get this all backwards. That somehow being strong and repressing emotions at a funeral where you've lost someone very close to you, that somehow that's preferable over just grieving consciously and feeling it all. In any event, many of the family members who weren't allowing themselves to feel during that time remained fucked up over the loss of my mom for years. They didn't process it. So, in trying to be strong, they repressed and made further problems for themselves. Later, depression set in for at least one family member, substance abuse because of unacknowledged, unprocessed grief. So, there's your answer. So, when you're grieving, notice how it happens. It's very subtle, but a memory will come in or some words about the person who's passed, and then the floodgates of emotion open. And that's fine. I'm not even saying do inquiry on that, but just notice those thoughts when they come through. Because in noticing them, you can shift down to the feeling then and just let it be. If you don't see the thoughts when they come through, you may be re-velcroing the experience. So by not observing them, they're still believed. So for example, if there's guilt around the death and thoughts around guilt come up, but you're not aware of them. You don't look at them at all. And so in not looking at them, they're believed more. The believability is reinforced by not, and so then you feel like you're at fault, that you're guilty, and here comes the feelings. But because you didn't see the thoughts, the feelings get pulled into the thoughts get pulled into the experience of the feeling. So there's a feeling of guilt, and then the thought, I did it. See, re-velcroing. And that's not necessarily very transformative, the re-velcroing like that, because you're just identifying with guilt, not really processing it directly, just identifying and re-velcroing it to cry again, to feel bad again. The feelings are fine. It's great that you're allowing those, but are you aware of the thoughts? that it can get pulled back into it. Uh, as for this person who lost their mother, watch out for this sort of a belief system that pops up that says that it's somehow you're doing a disservice to your mother or to a loved one if you truly process and let go of the grief and the guilt. But what I say is, like, if we could bring people back from the dead and ask them, do you want me to suffer over your death for the rest of my life? Chances are they'd say no. Move on. So we're not holding on to this grief or this guilt for them. We're doing it because we identify with it. It strengthens a sense of self for us to hold on to the stories of guilt and grief and loss, being a victim of those losses. That's for us, not for them. Strangely, after all this work, I've had about 6 people close to me die. Not so strangely, I guess, is that when I think about them, there's like a warmth in my heart and my belly, and the pictures are light and loving, and the pain is gone. So I don't forget the people. They're still accessible, but the energy with them is different. Imagine if I pulled those people up and every time I pulled them up, I just doubled over in pain. And then that's how I see those people, see them from pain. So their life isn't really honored in that way. Their pain is honored, or my pain is being honored. To truly let go of someone when they pass is the most loving thing you can do. It's the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let go, to feel and allow and let go of all of it. And there's another question here, if I can find it. Well, I remember it. It's essentially, Scott, can you talk about the difference between processing triggers and setting boundaries with people who trigger us? Everything that I share is just my own experience. I'm not giving advice. But why can't both things happen at once? Why can't you set a boundary and process it at the same time? Why not process all those triggers, even if you're setting boundaries? Because the triggers have insight and wisdom and deeper realization in them. If you go to the trigger that has created the boundary setting, you'll probably find fear within you, or woundedness, or trauma reactivated around the person. So the boundary doesn't fix that. The boundary doesn't resolve the trauma. It keeps you safe, which is important, can be important. But just knowing that that doesn't get to the root of the issue any more than taking a pill gets to the root of a disease. So even once you set the boundary, so if you set the boundary against someone and there's a real trigger there from your past, chances are if it's not resolved, if it's not really deeply looked at, you're going to be experiencing that again and again. Similar people, an archetype, a certain personality that's connected to something that happened to you. Every time that personality shows up, you're going to be setting that boundary, which is fine. You keep yourself safe. But the question is, what's behind the trigger? What are you believing there? What I've said to people is you can be clear around something and still set a boundary. And I don't know if everybody gets that. Like, you don't have to be. You can literally see through a trigger and still decide never to speak to someone. And maybe it's because you have a preference that you just don't want that energy in your life. Is that okay? Yeah, I don't want angry, violent neighbor in my house all the time. If angry, violent neighbor brings violence to my household, or then I have a right to set a boundary and say you can't come over. But is it bringing up something for me? See, is there anything that it's tied to in my past? That's the question. So I might start with a boomerang. So here's my angry, violent neighbor that I've set a boundary against. You can't come over. What does it mirror back about me that I have this angry, violent nature or neighbor? What deficiency story, if any, comes up? Oh, well, I'm unsafe. Might be one. So that's fine. I understand being safe against a neighbor. That makes sense. But then you look a little bit closer and you see, oh, I felt the same way around dad, or I felt the same way around my bullies, or my the nun in Catholic school. I had that same feeling of unsafety around that person. So could this be a transfer, a carrying over of some deficiency story that attached those early relationships and now is attaching itself to other relationships? So can I do that work then? If I know that the story is I'm unsafe, look back at those people from my past and reverse that. I'm safe. Here comes the programming. No, you're not. You have to protect yourself. But you're bringing it all into awareness now. It's all being bathed in awareness, the whole thing. So over in time, as you look at this unsafe story feels less and less real, more and more empty, like they're just words. And when that happens, the body changes, right? So the fear gets released or felt or whatever it is. And then you're going to look at that old relationship differently with the eyes of clarity. You're going to be seeing that situation with more compassion, whatever, and you're going to see the current situation with more compassion and clarity. You'll probably be able to see the suffering on the other person's side when you clear away your own suffering around it. But that doesn't mean then that you invite the angry neighbor over. Process every trigger around every boundary that you set so that you're not using boundaries as a way to hide. Follow me? Boundaries can be a way that we hide from our triggers. So if I can just say to the angry neighbor, don't come over, then I don't have to deal with the unsafe story that keeps triggering itself in my life. Or if I have a friend who talks all the time and tells a lot of stories and that annoys me, I can set the boundary. But if I do that in a way that I cloud over the trigger for me, I just cover it up, then chances are I'm going to meet other people who are loud and talkative and annoying. And I'm going to want to set a boundary to them. But if I look at my friend who's loud and talkative and tells a lot of stories and I ask, well, first of all, is it a shadow? Do I talk a lot and tell a lot of stories? Is that just a shadow? In which case, just own that. It's yours. Or is it bringing up some trigger from the past? Like when I'm around this person, I feel like I'm unheard because they're constantly talking. You see, how many times have you felt unheard around certain people? This is a pattern in you. Even if your friend talks too much, even if we all agree that, the question is, why does it bother you so much? That has to do with you more than them. So go and cleaning that up. Looking at all those relationships where you felt unheard, reversing that. They all heard me. Watching the objections. Then, as this story of not being heard is weaker, lighter, emptier, or not there, first of all, your friend will look different. maybe not so annoying, maybe more compassion, but it doesn't mean you're going to invite them over for every cocktail party. That's my point. It doesn't mean that, because we still have preferences about who we want to be around and who we don't, and that's okay. It just requires self-honesty, though, radical self-honesty. How much of the triggers coming or the boundaries coming from a preference, and how much of it is coming from pain, fear. I set several boundaries in my life, and some of those people I still don't have contact with, and I don't feel any pain over it. But I did. Sometimes during the boundary setting, I felt pain around it. So it's tricky. I get that if you're in pain or you're triggered and you know the boundary setting is coming from the pain, do inquiry before you set the boundary and after. If you have to set a boundary really quick for safety, then do that. Just safety is different, like physical safety. But for the most part, we have some time in many situations to really look at something before you set the boundary. If there's no real urgency to it, sit back and take a look. And do so thoroughly, like investigate all aspects of that pain or fear until you don't even really feel pain or fear around it anymore. And then see what you want to do. So here's something I want to share with you. This is a post. I just want to comment on this. Someone wrote, "How do our thoughts nourish us? Our thoughts become our actions, and it is our actions that bring inner satisfaction. When we think positively and always have good intentions towards others, although we might not be able to always do what we think of, our thoughts can also spread positive vibes. There are times when we meet unknown people. We instantly feel a deep connection. We feel at peace around them. It is nothing else but interaction with a satisfied soul. A soul that is well nourished through positive thoughts and actions can only bring others at ease." Sounds good. Let's dig a little bit deeper on that, because I think a lot of people believe this. It's worth looking at. First and foremost, if you try to cultivate only positivity, in some way you'd have to be repressing negative thoughts and feelings. And we now know from science that that's very unhealthy. It can cause chronic pain, illness, mental health issues, repressing negative things. So right on the outset, this isn't really based in science. It it comes from an assumption. First of all, the assumption is that we can actually push away all negative thoughts in favor of positive. But actually, if you look from a non-dual perspective, the positive are only there because of the negative. You can't have one side of a coin of anything without its opposite in the dualistic realm. So, in order to cultivate positive, there's already going to be negative there, because there would be no need to posit or bring about positivity if there wasn't negativity there already. See that? So they come together. That's an issue. If they come together, if one speaks to the existence of the other, then what are you going to do with the other? The negativity. If you can't have positivity without its opposite, what are you going to do with negativity? Are you going to repress it? if there's a positivity that shows up that's healthy, to me, it would be dealing with both sides of that coin, not just not just not just cultivating the positive. It wouldn't be like that. It would be from welcoming in everything, from seeing that everything is illusion. The positive and the negative are just arisings that come and go. There may be a positivity that shows up after that when we're no longer suffering. We may see the world with brighter eyes, with a sense of openness and awe and mystery and wonder and gratitude, joy. That's a positivity that can come about without repressing the negativity. When everything is looked at, everything, as Adia said, there's like a natural goodness under it all, a natural goodness. As we remove the blocks to that, that's what we find, a natural goodness. And that might show up as positive. That might show up as someone who has an energy about them that makes others feel good. Or they may even say things that make others feel good because they're coming from a really authentic place with their positivity, not one that denies negativity. But even that isn't necessary to be free. It's not even about cultivating something positive. I'm just saying that there is a natural goodness there. Adia is right. And from that, we can bring what we would call positivity to the world, but not at the expense of repressing emotions. For me, positive thinking didn't work. That's the bottom line, is after a certain degree of this kind of work, awareness-based work, you're probably going to find that it's hard to cultivate positivity because you see it as illusory, right? You see it as they're just thoughts and there's no substantial reality to them. So you can't hang your hat on it. You can't, after a certain while with this work, you just can't really, what's the word? You can't really believe them. But there is a natural goodness that shows up when we embody awareness and don't bypass, and we include all the negativity all the way down to the rage when everything is allowed. One could have quite a sweet view of life, actually, and of living, and I have that. It's like a very sweet, everything is very sweet, simple, loving, and that people might say, oh, that's positive. Okay, but I didn't get there from denying the negative. All right, guys, I may be back. We'll see.